south with wings on your feet. Go north with the wind where the three rivers meet.
Cross the river and climb the hill. Before too long, you could see home.
Look all around you and see.
You can sing a song and pass it down and hope that folks will remember it.
Deep in the forest there dragons will be.
You ever hear the one about the ghost and eternity? Or the one about the kid in the woods who lived with the dragon? Surely you've heard the one about the outlaw finding his way back to the woman he loves.
Thought maybe I'd write a book, or maybe even just tell my grandkids about it. It's such a great story.
Myths and folk tales have been the backbone of storytelling going back to the Greek and Roman classics and beyond. They're the core of the old idea that there are only a handful of stories to tell in the first place. While David Lowery has literally adapted Arthurian lore with The Green Knight, he's more than dabbled in mythology throughout his career. There seems to be a track record of not so much retelling myths and folk tales, but of exploring the nature of them, asking what we get from the stories that find their way through generations.
We build our legacy piece by piece.
Now plant yourself downside the tallest
You do what you can to make sure you're still around
Deep in the forest there dragons will be.
after you're gone.
Here follows a brief history of David Lowery and Myth.
I was just wondering if you'd heard anything.
About what?
About that local man who escaped from the penitentiary?
Ain't Them Bodies Saints on the surface is the story of an outlaw couple whose luck finally runs out. Casey Affleck's Bob and Rooney Mara's Ruth find themselves in a shootout with the law that ends with Bob's arrest and Ruth claiming not to have known what she was being pulled into. But before the film even starts, from the premise alone, Lowery has leaned into the legend of Bonnie and Clyde, providing the bit of truth that every good folktale ought to be built around. Then there's the title itself. Ain't Them Bodies Saints has nothing to do with the movie other than it's similarly evocative of an old story. And in fact, according to Lowery, the title was discovered by accident from a song lyric he misheard, setting a precedent for an entire film that plays out like a story passed down in the oral tradition. The movie actually begins with an opening title card that reads, "This was in Texas," like a speaker giving you the bare minimum context needed to begin their tale. It doesn't give us a date, or a long ago, or once upon a time, but the production design of the film seems to vaguely suggest a bygone era, suggesting that the story is timeless in nature, one of humanity rather than these particular humans. The opening sequence is filmed handheld with soft-focused, flare-inducing lenses and edited to skip through time, as though the storyteller is leaving out the unnecessary details, or allowing us, the viewer, to fill in our own details for when we pass the story on to the next audience. The opening plays directly into Old West outlaw mythology, but quickly moves to combine that with one of the most influential narratives in human history, the Odyssey.
I traveled high and far, and now I am close.
Ain't Them Bodies Saints is the story of a man serving time away from his wife and child, then struggling through many trials to return to them. Ben Foster's Officer Wheeler even serves as a willing suitor to Ruth in a similar role to the suitors to Odysseus' wife. Bob's shoeless journey over mountains and the poetic sense of destiny with which he describes his quest all line up with the Homeric origins of the oral tradition. Ironically, the most telling evidence of the oral tradition and its influence on the film comes in the form of a letter. Ruth writes a letter to Bob imploring him not to return. Of course, we as the audience are aware of this, but we also know that Bob will never read this letter. It's perfect dramatic irony. That we know crucial information the characters in play do not is ever present in the oldest reaches of storytelling, the tragedy of classic folklore, watching characters walk unknowingly toward their fate.
And the little horse ran and ran. The foxes chased him. And he could hear them barking. And the wolves ran after him.
You remember those stories that Meacham used to tell us? About dragons?
And he could hear them howling.
He wasn't making them up.
Another side to folklore is what the stories mean to a people. The act of storytelling itself can be culturally significant, banding people together as legends are passed down the generations. And there is perhaps no greater legendary creature than the dragon. The dragon is the central figure for knightly quests from Beowulf to St. George to The Hobbit, usually a crucible that tests a hero's mettle, a force of change and character growth. But rarely are they not the monster of the tale in quite the way Pete's furry best friend Elliot is. Lowery opens his remake of the 1977 Disney classic with a child reading a book, immediately drawing a clear line between this story and the type of morality play you might find in a children's book or fairy tale. Fantastic legends where bravery is the key more than strength or skill, and the lessons learned are meant to be universally true. This is driven home right off the bat when Pete is orphaned in the car crash that opens the film. The tragedy is meant to feel random, like it could happen to any kid, as opposed to a situation destined for only Pete. As Robert Redford's warm VO tells the tale to a group of kids, the film sets itself up as a kind of double-layered folktale. Nobody in Pete's Dragon is quite sure they believe the tales of the Millhaven Dragon, so they become characters in a film interacting with the legend the same way we do as viewers. The adventures of Pete and the people of Millhaven as the legendary dragon becomes known to all unfolds not only for the viewer but also to an audience of dubious loggers and open-hearted townspeople. Underneath it all, however, Lowery's fondness for myths and legends shows itself in Pete's Dragon as the importance of togetherness, of people bonded by their experience with something truly legendary. Families that were at odds are brought back together and expanded to include new members, all thanks to a shared myth that Millhaven finally began to believe. Like the most enduring legends, though, Pete's Dragon ends with the story retreating into the mists once more, leaving behind it, however, a sense that the truth of it is deeper than any of us know.
I have never seen a dragon.
Well, just because you don't see something doesn't mean it's not there.
And just because you say it's true doesn't mean it is.
It's not an easy task to describe what a ghost story is about, but when a man dies in a car accident, again a random event that could happen to any of us, his ghost haunts the house he shared with his now grieving partner. It's an intimate yet also massive exploration of legacy lost to time, of eternity itself, all seen through the cutout eye holes of a white-sheeted ghost. On a personal note, 2017's A Ghost Story is a film that I thought about for years, even after only seeing it once in a makeshift theater at Sundance. It's a film that asks big questions, forcing you to reckon with difficult answers that stick with you long after the credits. But among the many things the film is memorable for, the design of the titular ghost is chief among them. That the image of the white sheet ghost costume is so basic every kid who's ever heard of Halloween recognizes it is no mere affectation. It's a common place to start, a touchstone that everybody understands as a way to connect to the larger, more difficult to confront themes in the film. Simply titling the film A Ghost Story references a type of myth familiar around the world and throughout history, letting us know to get comfortable because we've heard these stories before. The ideas the film deals in are big and difficult. It's a tall order to ask an audience to contemplate how small mortality makes us in the face of an eternity that keeps moving when we're gone. In this sense, A Ghost Story deals with folktales and myth as an actual human need. As the character credited as the prognosticator explains, the universe will keep expanding. Life will begin and life will end, and maybe part of you will live on or maybe it won't. That life might simply be a speck in time that will be forgotten is a difficult idea to accept. The point of a ghost story is that it's the stories themselves that give us purpose. We need to hang on to the idea that our actions and thoughts and creativity have a meaning and a legacy beyond ourselves. Take Rooney Mara's character, for instance, and her character's habit of leaving notes in the tiny corners of her homes. They are pieces of her own personal life story that she's leaving behind. It's not until the ghost is able to read her note and finally be set free. By dressing up these difficult-to-swallow ideas in a white sheet with the eyes cut out, David Lowery was able to illustrate just how important myths can be.
You know how it is. You hear a story and you see a picture and we heard all kinds of stories.
The Old Man and the Gun opens with a title card that reads, "This story also is mostly true," as though the film cheekily assumes we're aware of Lowery's other films to date. Having based a film around the archetype of real-life legends and explored the relationship between myths and the truth that bore them, here he's transitioned into an actual true story. The title, again, just gives the impression of a folktale, and The Old Man and the Gun is a testament to real people becoming legends. Forrest Tucker escaped from prison in his 70s, then pulled off a series of bank heists across the country. What's more, he had a blast doing it. Witnesses described him as a gentleman who seemed happy. Public thought it was charming. Even the cop chasing Forrest began to hope he didn't catch him. It's a film that speaks to a real-world legend's ability to fascinate. There's an admiration, maybe even a jealousy baked into this tale. There's a reason the facts of Forrest Tucker's life transcend into something more. It's fascinating to hear about a real person behaving legendarily because, buried in this so crazy it's true tale of an elderly bank robber who refuses to quit, is a simple moral about happiness.
And he looked at me and he said, "Brother, I'm not talking about making a living. I'm just talking about living."
While The Green Knight is as straight up mythical as they come, it's been a step that David Lowery's been dancing towards his entire career. Dealing with classical mythology draped in Western folklore, a legend lurking in the deep dark woods, or tales with simple dressings that speak to complicated experience. Lowery's work has not only explored what a myth can be, but what they can mean to us, and how we interact with it, continuing the storytelling tradition the way folklore always intended.